Are we ready? Ready? Our conversationalists have already started. I know. We'll just start going. Alex. All right, everybody. Good afternoon in what is a beautiful springtime day here at San Jose State University at San Jose, California. We have people from all over the world joining us on Zoom and in the webinar, so thank you so much for joining. I'd like to welcome everybody, and as we chit-chat today, I would also welcome you to go get yourself a little bit of Nirvana Soul coffee, tea, and pastries. They're always welcome and open. And please, if you feel like you need to move up into the front row, faculty, please move up in the front row. They don't want to be in the front row either. So I'll do the official start. Welcome everyone to both our in-person and our Zoom audience. I'm Catherine D. Harris, the Director of Public Programming and Professor of Literature and Digital Humanities here at San Jose State University in the College of Humanities and the Arts. We are really excited to dive into a fascinating and essential topic today, especially here at SJSU, where we are located in the middle of Silicon Valley. I'm not kidding. For those of you who are on Zoom, we are about a 5-minute walk from Adobe. We're around multiple campuses of Google, Meta, Facebook, everything you could think of. And also I want to express a happy publication month for Emily M. Bender and Alex Hanna. Their book, The AI Con, How to Fight Big Tech's Hype and Create the Future We Want, provides a lot of hope towards reframing and revising this AI gold rush. And if you stick around after the conversation, we're going to raffle off 7 copies. You'll also be able to purchase a copy and grab a signature from either of our or both of our authors over at a table over here. Thank you to our partners today sponsoring today's event, including H&A in Action, which is really Dean Shannon Miller, who's here with us today, and her entire staff. Thank you to that staff. They're extremely hardworking. The Masters of Archives and Records Administration program and the cross-campus interdisciplinary Responsible Computing Learning Experience Initiative, or CIRCLE, is also one of our partners and provided our Nirvana Soul catering. This is really Dr. Dara Hoffman, Nada Attar, Suvik Ghosh, and Michelle Villagrán, and they also donated books for raffling and provided these snacks for us. And thank you also to our Department of Humanities, who also donated books for raffling off. And special thanks to our favorite student club, the Responsible Computing Club, which was born out of the Circle Initiative and with the support of the Mozilla Foundation. They're over here working very hard, engaging everybody who's online. Today, Rhonda Holberton, on the far side, joins the authors in a conversation that will take us through their work. In the middle is Emily M. Bender, and on the side closest to me is Alex Hanna, just in case you needed to know. As you listen in on their conversation, those of you at home, please join in on the chat to engage in your own conversation as everybody piques your interest in what they're talking about. If you'd like to have a question considered for the Q&A in the webinar, please be sure to use the webinar Q&A for those people at home feature to submit. The recording of today's event will be available on the college's YouTube channel and distributed via email to all registered participants, everybody in the room as well, and accessible for you to share with everyone too. Here to kick us off today and do some introductions is the president of the Responsible Computing Club, Giulio Huzenzada. Okay,
Thank you, Dr. Harris. Okay, not nerve-wracking at all. All right, hello, Dr. Bender. Hello, Dr. Hanna, and everyone here. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm Julia, a data science student here at San Jose State University and president of the Responsible Computing Club with over 200 members from different disciplines and fields of study over here. At San Jose State, we pride ourselves in being Silicon Valley's public university. We hear the word innovation a lot. And of course, we hear the word AI even more. But with all these buzzwords constantly around us, many of us students have started asking questions. We stop and pause, and we wonder why, and whether the next shiny thing is the right thing. At RCC, where we explore the social and political context of computing, we like to take a step back and be the whyers. We ask, what's really behind the hype? What systems are we building? Who benefits? Who gets left out? Sometimes when we strip away these buzzwords, AI is just mathy math or salami, systematic approaches to learning algorithms and machine inferences. Suddenly, it sounds a lot less magical. That's why we're so excited to welcome you both to SJSU. You're not here to just sell us the next big thing, but to question it, to bring nuance, honesty, and remind us that we have agency to decide how these tools are used and when to say no. AI isn't inevitable, but community, critical thinking, accountability, that's how we build something better. Thank you again, and we can't wait to hear from you.
Thank you. That was so nice to start with a student perspective and something that I hope we can continue to kind of pull back to. So I thought maybe we could start with a fun little game. If you don't mind introducing one another. So Emily, introduce Alex with maybe a tidbit that you know about Alex that would help frame the discussion. And then Alex, if you could do the same for Emily.
I get to go first. Everyone please meet Dr. Alex Hanna. She is a sociologist and the director of research at the Distributed AI Research Institute, world's best co-author. And something that maybe doesn't usually make the academic bio is that she's also a big roller derby person. And this has been hugely important for our collaboration because every time we needed to find a professional, so the producer for our podcast or the fact checker for our book, Alex was like, oh, I know a guy. Well, she's women, but I know a guy.
On the roller derby team.
Yeah, amazing. Everybody, please say welcome to Professor Emily M. Bender, also the world's best co-author, also a collector of co-authors named Alex. So she has several. Emily is a incredible co-author, deep thinker and linguist. I learned so much about linguistics from her. I would say the most impressive thing about Emily, however, is first how early she wakes up and how much she runs and is very committed to that. And so usually I'll wake up around like a schlub, 6:30, and Emily will have already sent multiple messages and opined on, you know, a few different skeets occurring on the internet. And so it's very impressive and very admirable.
So you all met one another online. Alex, you're based at UC Berkeley, and I know I'm going to get this wrong, and you will kill me if I do.
Right.
University
of Washington, that's
okay.
right. So long as you don't say Washington University,
exactly.
I'm good.
I know that I can't do that. So will you tell the audience and me a little bit about how you met and then how that led then to the book?
Yeah. You want to start it this time?
Sure, yeah. So we had met originally on, is the mic on? I can't tell.
Did we just lose the mic?
Hello. I hear my, oh, there I am. Okay, hi. So we had met originally.
Whoops.
Now it's gone out. Oh, no.
All right, well.
Let's use a lectern. Oh, there he goes. It's back on. I hear myself switching on and off. Maybe I'm doing it. Okay. All right.
All right, should I start the story? Okay, I'll start. So we started interacting online in the late 2010s on Twitter as part of a larger conversation looking at societal impacts of machine learning. I was more on the natural language processing side, and sort of just like knew of each other as someone who made relevant contributions in that space. And then in 2020, Alex was part of a group of people working on some academic papers about the use of data sets in machine learning. And I'm not sure whose idea it was in that group to invite me, but someone invited me. And I got to be a part of it, and it was wonderful. And that turned into 3 papers. And then when we were done with those 3 papers, we had our meetings for a little while longer, but realized we weren't working towards something. So those meetings just became a group chat. And then there's 1 or 2 other group chats that we were in together somehow. And we were all doing this work of fighting back against the hype around AI. And in one of those group chats, I was sort of musing about this video that was a hype artifact and saying, how do you combat the hype in a video? And one of our colleagues, Dr. Meg Mitchell, said, oh, well, just give it the Mystery Science Theater 3000 treatment. So that idea is floating around. And then a few months later, we came across this like long blog post by Google VP Blaise Aguirre-Arcas entitled, Can Machines Learn How to Behave? And it was just hype paragraph after hype paragraph. I'm like, this would be exhausting to do in textual format. We've got to give this the MST3K treatment. Who's in? And Alex said,
yeah, let's go for it. So I said, I bet we could do this on Twitch. Let's try streaming this on Twitch. And I had never streamed on Twitch, and then tried to figure it out, and then it failed horribly once we set everything up. And so we had to switch streaming clients in the middle of the stream, and people still stuck around, and we did 45 minutes. And don't go back, don't listen to the first, if you're a purist like me, don't go back to the first podcast. It sounds kind of like crap, because the sound is terrible. But we didn't have enough time to finish in the first one, so we did a second one and then a third one. And then we just went from there, and then people were like, you should make a podcast. And so we hired one of those roller derby people, Christy Taylor. He was a podcast producer extraordinaire, helped us out. And from episode 8 onwards, we had a podcast. Now we're to episode 56, which was released this week. Then we were kicking around the idea of writing a book, and then we were approached by our agent, Ian Bonaparte, who really understood the project. And now we're here. Now we have a book.
Now we have a book. And so starting in 2020, we participated in their authorship of 3 articles, wrote together a couple of op-eds, produced 50 some odd episodes of a podcast, wrote a whole book, and then in March of 2025, we finally met.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Technology.
Yeah.
Oh, technology.
Sometimes good?
Question mark?
Question mark?
Maybe we can jump in and start talking about technology good question mark. So the title of the book, and I'm assuming that most of the podcasts, yes, the AI con, right? It's not the AI hype, it's the AI con. So it's a very specific word to use, and I would imagine quite polarizing in certain fields. Can you, for the audience, who likely many of us have used AI and kind of engage in that sense of magic that our student illuminated, maybe tease out that tension of both the magic that appears when you're engaged with the technology, but also what you're framing as the kind of hype around it, and the con-like nature of the evangelists. We can talk about some of the frameworks or the hype, like kind of narratives, but maybe speak a little bit about the way that you think the con is operating, and maybe in contrast to other bubbles that we've seen in the Bay Area, in particular around tech.
So how about I talk about the illusion behind the parlor trick, and then you talk about the con part of it. So this is part of where linguistics is super important to this conversation, because at the heart of the not coherent set of technologies that get called AI, everyone's really excited right now about the large language models, which I like to refer to as synthetic text extruding machines. And linguistics is relevant because linguistics is the field that studies how language works and how we work with language. And we need something from each of those to understand what's going on with the chatbots. On the how language works front, the key point is that languages are systems of signs. So you have form and you have meaning, and they're not the same thing. But as soon as you encounter text or speech or sign in a language that you know, you get both at the same time. It is really hard to perceive the form without also already processing the meaning, because that's what we do with our languages. when you are traveling abroad, somewhere where you don't speak the language, you can see lots of linguistic form that you don't understand, and that maybe makes it clearer. The important thing to know about the language models is that their training data, that is the data that they are used to find the patterns in, is just the form. It's not mapped to any meaning. It's not mapped to any communicative intent. But what we've built are systems that are really good at mimicking the form of linguistic behavior. And then when we read that, here comes the other part of linguistics, how we work with language, right? You might think that when you read something, you're just unpacking the meaning that someone put in the words there. But what the psycholinguists tell us is that that's not actually how that works. When we are understanding language, what we're doing is we are building a big model of what we think the other person thinks, what we think is the shared common ground, what we think they think about us, and so on. And then in the context of that model, saying, what must they have been trying to convey by picking those words in particular? And so that exercise of understanding inherently involves imagining a mind behind the text. In the case of ChatGPT and the like, there is no mind there, but we are still imagining it in order to make sense of the text. And that is sort of at the heart of this parlor trick. And that is why I think it is so magical seeming and so seductive. And it gives the con men a really good tool to use. I'll pass it to you.
Yeah. So they've set up this entire facade, and the whole industry is then premised on this notion of this parlor trick. The sense that we've had this notion of a mind that's behind the technology. And so we call it a con in a few different registers. It's a con insofar as there's a notion there that there's a technology in which there's a mind behind there, and there's sort of intelligence that can be used to execute on many different tasks the same way that humans would. But that's certainly not the case. There's some kind of thing that is a technology that has something that everyday people can use. And this makes it a little different from something like cryptocurrency or blockchain, because most people don't know how to interact with that. They might be able to go to Coinbase or, I don't know where you buy an NFT, but so there's some kind of access to it. But at the same way, it's the same kind of hype bubble, where what it's really doing behind the scenes is that it's taking and scraping data that's not nailed down. Any data that's not nailed down, it takes a huge amount of labor to power at all, speaking about labor. And there's these data centers that exist all over the world and are being built more and more and have environmentally ruinous consequences. And we're doing that to have these machines which are promised to be a most revolutionary technology. At the end of the day, the con is trying to get huge VC money, trying to get these major market valuations, and jumping into the AI gold rush here in Silicon Valley, as Kathy mentioned, and trying to get a piece of the pie. And so that's the con, and it runs on multiple levels. This kind of con on what we see in the product and imagining that mind behind that product, and then saying it's going to change everything when it's really the latest fad in tech hype.
So one of the things that I think when we kind of name it as a con or as hype, we also potentially run into the danger of undermining some of the potential consequences, right? That while maybe the mechanics of the AI itself is conny or a hallucination on the user side, not on the machine side, that there are real world consequences. So why then is it important, enough to kind of make the podcast, to publish the papers, write a book, if it is just kind of a con and this too will pass, why do you think, what's at stake here and why is it important to name it?
Yeah, well, just because it's a con doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences in the world. Cons have consequences, which is a good line I just come up with, and I'm going to use it in the future. You heard it here first. So cons have consequences. Just because something is a facade and there's some idea of meaning doesn't mean that it isn't being used and doesn't have social, economic, political, environmental impact in the world. Social impact, we're seeing the labor market effects in which bosses say that they can remove so much labor and increase productivity without that being proven anywhere. Any kind of data that's come out on productivity gains, because that's the thing that is the promise. Those haven't been borne out, and could have told you as much. You're seeing governments trying to paper over important social services and medical services with large language models when those are not going to be doing the job of important social services. We see that in science and saying we shouldn't, we're going to get rid of the NSF and the NIH or whatever, or rather effectively get rid of them, rather reduce their indirect rates to 15% and destroy the modern research university because there's this vision that AI can automate science without an understanding what science is and how science works, that art can be produced and that creativity can be supplanted and done by machines. And then I mentioned the environmentally disastrous consequences, the massive data center buildup, the excess carbon that's being put in the atmosphere, the air pollution that is being belched out in Northern Virginia and Memphis and Atlanta and all the places where the data centers are being constructed at a ridiculous clip. So just because there's a con doesn't mean it doesn't have consequences.
Yeah. And you say, why do this work of trying to undermine the con? Because in each of those places, there's people making decisions. And if we can show the con for what it is, then hopefully fewer decisions along those lines will be made in favor of automation and instead more in favor of people.
That's actually a beautiful segue. So one of the things I thought we could do now is kind of, I have some quotes that I'd like you to deep analyze. And so some of this might just be in the kind of like glossing over the language of the sales pitch. Some of it might, trigger ideas about, again, either a misunderstanding or a sleight of hand to hide some of the technology layers. And then some of it might be, again, an overlooking of some of these output questions. So the first one I'd like to start with is actually not from a technologist, but from a filmmaker, James Cameron. You all may know him from the likes of Titanic and Avatar and Terminator, appropriately enough. So James says, he's kind of talking about what it means to regulate either inputs or outputs of AI, and I think kind of glosses over maybe terms of creativity, but I'll just read it and kind of see what maybe hot take you all have.
And this is truly hot take. We haven't seen this ahead of time.
Okay.
I know, just really doing it on the fly.
So he says, humans, we are all models moving through space and time based on our training data. He's talking about moving through life and accumulating experiences and likening that to an AI model that's being trained. He thinks we need to focus on the output, not the input. He goes on to say the output of predictive, well, he doesn't call it this, the output of predictive media should be judged based on whether it's quote unquote, too close to existing copyright content. So suggesting that the way that we evaluate either artwork or is good or bad, or legally, we shouldn't be worried about training data scraping artist material, that artists should use the AIs, and that the way to judge whether it's violating copyright is if it's too much like another copyrighted entity in the world.
So, so I recognize in there actually a really common move of dehumanization. And so so people familiar with the phrase stochastic parrots? Yeah. I coined that. It keeps getting attributed to other people, frequently attributed to Sam Altman, because 2 years after I coined it, he tweeted, "I am a stochastic parrot, and so letter R, letter U." And then people say, oh, like Sam Altman says, no, excuse me, that's mine. But also, it's very dehumanizing. Basically, he's saying, because we can't get these synthetic text extruding machines to be like what it really is to be human, let's minimize what it is to be human so that the machines look more special, look more like us. And that seems to be the same move in that first part there. And it's sad. And it's sad, especially from someone in the arts, to hear that. And then there's a second move, but I'd maybe let you go.
Yeah, so the second part of that, I mean, this is an argument I think that gets used a lot. So this is now we're getting into the kind of legality of using different artworks as training data for different models, and this has become very peaked both in text and in images and video. And so some of the defenders of quote-unquote AI art have said, well, we're kind of doing the same thing that humans do. We're taking as input inspirations from the world, and we're remixing it and we're putting it out in the world. And we're just doing the same thing when we're using these models to do such a thing, which I think gets at a bit of a profound misunderstanding of what the machine is doing, what humans are doing, and what humans are doing when they're engaging with artwork. So first off, as Emily said, it's a dehumanizing move to say that what we're doing is just remixing, as if we have an internal sense of model weights and we just have a neural architecture and we've just weighted these things through back propagation or whatever, and therefore we are just generating now new artworks. First, that's not what the human brain is doing. We don't really understand what the human brain is doing, but it's certainly not that. The second part of it is that humans, when they are creating artworks, is that they're doing so in dialogue with others, and they're doing so in community with others. So making an artwork is more about having a community of practice and thinking about how certain kind of influences borrow from each other, and you're engaging in that community of practice. So there's a great quote in the book from Jen Lena, who's a sociologist of culture, who talks about this, who talks kind of how those works talk to each other, and even in critique, that is engaging somebody on those grounds. And then the third part of that, the copyright work, is kind of ridiculous, that Cameron is saying, we only need to judge things on the outputs. Well, first off, when you look at many of these things, the outputs are pretty much identical to many of these. So you look at the New York Times case, many of the outputs are identical to that. But at the same time, why should we judge theft by the outputs of a theft? If you are taking data and you make paper mache of my data and it sort of looks like something different, there was still an original act of theft. Why would that be any kind of way? Why should that be a means of judging that rather than the original act of taking? And so many of and even if the outputs don't look anything like the inputs, there's still that original act of saying, you have taken this, and that was something that I made via the cultivation of my craft through years of education, through years of practice, and this has been taken and inserted into this tool, and then output something that may or may not look similar. The outputs shouldn't really matter. It should be mattering what's on the input. So James Cameron, really off the mark there.
Yes.
So thumbs down, maybe. Okay.
James Cameron, thumbs down.
No.
The other thing that I think, and you alluded to it, right, in this redirect to outputs and away from inputs is devaluing high quality data, right, or the importance of high quality data going into the machine, right? Your outputs are only going to be in an algorithmic model as good, or a predictive model as good as the data that it's using to make those predictions. So as folks who are engaged in academic institutions, part of the point is producing high quality information, high quality, and artifacts of high quality information live in our libraries. The CSU system has recently engaged in a contract with OpenAI, and I'm wondering, thinking about that contract and the amount of money that the university is actually spending for the use of this, for the luxury of training OpenAI on high quality data. Can you talk a little bit about how a lot of these models end up getting their data in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, so in every way possible. And I just want to remark there about two things. One, the garbage in, garbage out idea, especially when you're talking about synthetic text, it's actually even worse than that, because even if you had just good data in, you're still getting paper mache out. So there's that issue. But if you want that output to look fluent or erudite or whatever, then you would need that kind of input. Alex has this phrase that I love, which is they're trained on everything that wasn't locked down, everything that wasn't nailed down on the internet.
Nailed down, yeah.
It's just grab whatever you can. You'll also hear people saying this is trained on the entire internet, and that's a flag that people don't know what they're talking about, because the internet isn't something you can go take, right? It's distributed by nature. And there's actually a whole lot of decision making that goes into that crawling and scraping, and what do you scrape? And one of the big problems is, well, two things. One is that people will say, oh, it's diverse. We're just grabbing everything. We aren't curating. And so therefore, we're getting a diversity of perspectives. And that abdication of decision making, even if true, is still a kind of decision. And it's still leading to a particular set of data. And this is where our work on data practices was focused for a lot of it.
Yeah.
But also, a second big issue is that we don't really know what's in the data sets. And that is hugely problematic. If you were going to use automation based on pattern matching at scale in order to judge if it is a good tool for your particular use case, you want to know what it was trained on. And they don't tell us, and I think they largely don't tell us because it was largely stolen.
Yeah. And I mean, I guess there's the things that you did mention, the OpenAI license that CSU has decided to spend 16.9 million or on to have a site license for everybody in the system. I mean, I guess where does the data that comes from people, like, where does that go? And I mean, there's, to some degree, there's a little checkbox which OpenAI says, don't use this don't use my data to train whatever. But I mean, what's the mechanism to actually enforce that? There's none, right?
So the lack of the transparency, right, and oversight. And embedded into, so let's maybe kind of stay with Sam for a moment because it's so fun to punch up. So Sam goes to Congress, says, we need to be regulated, regulate us, regulate us, regulate us. He kind of gets up and he performs this altruistic kind of good guy. And then we were seeing AI, OpenAI and others lobby Congress to put into our budget proposal that a foreclosure of regulation on AI for 10 years.
Yeah.
Right. And so can we maybe talk a little bit about, well, maybe a quote from him and then, using that as a backdrop. Okay. Sam Altman's quote, it's easy to get caught up in the geopolitical tensions and race that we can lose sight, such that we lose sight of the gigantic humanity level decision that we have to make in the not too distant future. So in this, he's talking about artificial superintelligence and says the important question, not the geopolitical question, is what is the world going to look like? What is the role of the humans there in this age of superintelligence?
Oh, Lord. When did he say this?
Recently.
Was this the last week?
It was an interview. I saw it for the first time 2 weeks ago on social media.
Okay.
I can track down the date of the publication.
Got it. Because, I mean, he says he's got. It's just I see. I'm like, we're gonna start. Yeah, I know. I mean, it gets worse and worse every week, and so I know he was in Congress last week, speaking in the Commerce Committee, right? Yeah. So where to start with this quote? So there's a lot to start with it. One is the AI race thing. One is the superintelligence thing, and I'll let Emily talk about the superintelligence thing. Okay. So I don't really want to talk about it. But the AI race thing is one that's a narrative, right? And I mean, it's the one that's about foreclosing regulation. And so the major line that Altman has said, and this was actually, I think 2 years ago, is we want regulation, we want regulation. And this was at the same time as the EU AI Act was under negotiation. Same time, OpenAI sends a memo to the EU, to the European Parliament, and is like, you cannot regulate general purpose models. If you do so, you're going to foreclose any kind of feature. We need to build bigger models. We need to scale them up. And so it ends up in the final EU AI legislation, there is no restriction on their quote-unquote foundation models, which is a term that we don't use because up the road, it's a made-up term that they started at Stanford. We can just call them large language models and diffusion models to be more precise. And so first off, with one hand he's saying we need regulation, the other hand he's not. The other one is foregrounding the AI China race. China doesn't have regulation, and so because they don't have regulation, we must not have any regulation. And so
China doesn't have regulation?
And China does have regulation. I mean, they do actually have regulation. They do have, but he's effectively waiving this, right?
Yeah,
they're going to beat us. They're the new Soviets, right? And so you've got this in the background and what he's waving. And he's said before that we can't have copyright restrictions because if we have copyright, we're going to lose the race with China. We can't have this. And then the pivot, the very opportunistic pivot has been to then foreground national defense in AI production. So, under the Biden administration, it had been more about this innovation. Under the Trump administration, it's been squarely about this national security and elements of it. And so there's kind of this changing of tune that AI is going to be X, Y, and Z depending on the political situation. But in the background is always this thing about superintelligence and AGI.
Yeah.
So tell us more, Emily.
First of all, I'm going to shout out our most recent episode of our podcast where we took apart a hype artifact that sort of lays out this very standardized, actually, as it happened, science fiction fantasy of how we get from large language models to a machine that outsmarts us all and kills us all. So see episode 56 of Mystery AI Hype Theater 3000, and see also Adam Becker's new book, More Everything Forever, which really, in a detailed and not too hard to stomach way, goes through all of the ideologies behind this stuff. Because we haven't talked about it yet today, but the very term intelligence is actually grounded in these histories of eugenics and race science. And the idea that you can line people up according to some number that measures their, in quotes, intelligence, and then line machines up in the same way is behind this idea of we can get to the point where the machines exceed us. And then mixed in there is this very self-aggrandizing idea that the most sort of intelligent thing you can be doing is AI research. And so once we've developed a machine that's more intelligent than us, it will do more AI research. And then there you get this intelligence explosion and off into this thing. And it's based on nothing. I was reacting to the very first part of that quote where he basically says, the thing that I'm worried about is more important, bigger than like the biggest thing that you could imagine, geopolitics. I've got something more important than that. It is so self-aggrandizing.
Yeah.
Well, it's a brilliant move too, right? Where if you can kind of tap into this instinctive and seated fear in all of the movies and the science fiction that we've read,
Exactly, yeah.
then it's easy to say, well, no, you're worried about the wrong thing. It's not regulation. It's not, how AI is going, become part of the surveillance state. It's actually this bigger and interesting question, right? It's not an uninteresting question to speculate on.
Yeah, but it's interesting in the way that like late night dorm room conversations are interesting. It's interesting in the way of
It's
use.
interesting it's interesting when you've got the worst blunt rotation. Like it's just, insofar as the hype artifact we actually focused on was a very, I was thinking about it for a few days more than the hype artifacts, not because it was plausible. It was like, oh, this is an interesting mind experiment, but people really believe it in a serious way, and I was speaking with a reporter from a newspaper recently about AI 2027 for a Bay Area newspaper, which will go unnamed, and the way that, to summarize this hype artifact, the story is the smartest people in the world work on AI research, AI tools then produce science. By the science, I don't know what that means for them, but they produce science. It gets so good, it self-creates a mind. Even those within a year, or 2 years, those AI researchers that are humans become, they're just micromanaging the AI scientists, and then they produce nanorobots and they have data centers, and effectively humans become extraneous and they make micro robots, and the micro robots all inject us all with a toxin that they've invented. And this is a sort of realistic. And so then this is their realistic way of this. This is what this is like a real story. And so then this reporter asked me, okay, but explain to me on a technical level why this isn't going to happen. And I'm like, you need incredible proof that it will happen. Yeah. And one of these subtitles that Emily wrote in the book was great. It's extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so I was like, well, first off, science doesn't work like that. If you think that automation of science is a thing that is possible, or if science just emerges as if ideas somehow get better according to linear scale. That is not how science works. Science works through concerted research programs, and it works through different paradigms. Please, I beg of you, read one philosophy of science book, read Thomas Kuhn and stop talking to me. And then, and so I think so one thing that Becker's book does really well is talk about how very unserious these people are about science and how profoundly anti-science they are, and because that's not how it works. It's not how any of this works.
Can I add one more
Yeah,
thing?
please.
Around regulation, we often hear the trope that regulation stifles innovation. And that actually only makes sense if by innovation you mean the ability of a few people to amass all the money.
And they do.
And they do, yeah. But for the rest of us, what regulation does is it channels innovation into technologies and ideas and systems that are actually beneficial if we've written the regulation well.
Right. So that, there's two paths that I kind of am vacillating now, right, to go down. One is kind of talking about external harms of AI, and then the other path is staying maybe for a moment with this question of what intelligence is, if we're naming super intelligence as this great threat. Will you talk a little bit about, okay, so I'm going to use a personal anecdote now. I've been using AI and Claude to help re-author digital artworks that are becoming unexhibitable because they were written on legacy platforms, right? So things that cannot be read. But we have videos of users using them. And so I'm asking Claude to take a look at the video, see if you can turn what was like a director file, a DVD, into HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And so from the image, it's in one of the projects, it's a petal, 12 petals. They all have names, rollover images on the petals. I have a screenshot of all the names. So the AI was able to pull out, from the image, names like homunculus for one of the chapter headings, created an HTML page for me, set all of this up. Something that would have taken me days, probably, to do. It was almost instantaneous. Now, I know a little bit about code, so when it came out, it was this little Frankenstein machine. I was able to kind of coax it into something kind of usable. But that felt so magical to me. So we'll talk a little bit about magic, but it also felt highly intelligent. And can you tell me why I'm wrong about those things?
Yeah, so let me try to repeat back the story. So you have a piece of digital artwork that no longer exists in any readable format, but there's video of somebody experiencing it. And you fed that video into a system and were able to, using the system, reverse engineer something close to the original artwork, but with modern platforms so that you could recreate it.
Yeah.
Is that, okay,
Yeah.
So part of the reason I did that is that whenever people said, I use the AI too, I'm like, no, okay, what specifically was the input? What was the output? And so you've got a system that takes visual input, which is specified to be a series of web pages? Did you?
Yeah, I tell it that I want it to run using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript only. Yeah, I want it to run in browser. The other thing, in that back and forth, right, is me telling it, essentially giving it kind of a pseudocode, where it's you click here, it does this, you click here, it does that.
So a big part of the training data for these systems is actually a kind of machine translation data set, where you have natural language, probably mostly English, and then different programming languages. And so you were using this interface that presents itself as general purpose and gives you a chatbot and all that stuff, that's part of the illusion, in order to access what was effectively a English to Java, CSS, and HTML, JavaScript, machine translation system. And I wish that we could have something that is specifically that's set up as that, and that isn't dressed up in here, I'm a helpful assistant, Clippy's great grand spawn,
Yeah.
doing this for you, right?
Sorry, I'm just imagining what that little icon would look like, this kind of monster.
Yeah. And that's one that I'm going to use now in the future.
That's
great grand spawn.
Yeah.
The new.
That's a good one.
So I think that's the magic is, well, first of all, it's nice to be able to do that. And then there's this additional layer of interface that makes it look like you are just asking something that you could ask anything, and it happens to be able to do this thing that you want, when in fact that's actually something that's very much designed to do. In terms of why you think of that as intelligence. I think that that probably taps into some cultural things that we have going on, where we have what Tamik Gabru has referred to as a hierarchy of knowledge. And there's, within the university, different fields of study are valorized more than others. And it tends to be the fields of study where, in order to get into them, you have to pass exams, and the grading of the exams is very much, could be done automatically even in the old days. And so the people who can do that feel like they've crossed a hurdle, and then those people go and take like an English literature class, and it seems like nonsense to them, and there is no corresponding exam that says, oh, but the people who can do this one have this particular set of skills. And so I think that anything around coding is meant to be this hallmark of intelligence, and we're swimming in it, and it's hard to break free.
I would say that, the kind of referent to intelligence is kind of, first off, there's the perniciousness of the notion of intelligence and how the kind of quantum, as Emily was referencing earlier, the kind of rank order of intelligence has a dark history in eugenicism and the kind of, ranking, and this has been very true in UK and US psychological and statistical traditions. Originally in the UK, ranking people according to mental acuity, usually used as a way to kind of classify people who are mentally disabled as subhuman, and then, as many things in the USR, was imported as a means of rank ordering people by race. And so that referent to intelligence is any kind of reification of intelligence always has that risk. And so, this is a pretty old argument that Stephen Jay Gould made in The Mismeasure of Man, in 1980, whenever he wrote that. And so there's first that risk, but this kind of notion of what it feels like to be intelligent. I would say that AI research doesn't have a notion of what intelligence is. So the reference is not really there. There's not really a lot of things that they lean on to define it. There's then this fallback on something vague, which they call capabilities, which is not really, and capabilities then also still has a reference to something of human action, but it's still very unclear. So what is a capability? And so it's really just a house built on quicksand. And so then, so they depend quite a lot on the wow factor. Okay, this seems to do this very well because of this mapping of, let's say, that those images to code, and that looks like it is something that is, but we're still interpreting that as some kind of an intelligence, even though there's no kind of idea of what that would mean on a theoretical or, I guess, an empirical basis either for the AI people.
So this might actually be an interesting time to open up to the audience for some Q&A. I, of course, want to ask you more questions, and I am doing this under duress. But I'm sure our audience will pick up on some of the threads that I want to kind of pull out.
So I'm wondering if our audience in person would be generous enough to allow us to do first question from online, because we have quite a significant, and we'll come to you next. We'll try to be fair, like, being fair with our children. Or our students, those of us who don't have children, or our cats, So the question online from Jupjit is, in what ways are we seeing the meaning of being human devalued through the economic transition we're experiencing?
I'd say transition is doing a lot of work there.
Yeah.
Transition to what? we're in a kind of a place where we're on the precipice of another recession, right? And in that case, we're getting to this. And there was actually this fascinating thing that was published in The Atlantic, which, we hear a lot of news reports on the unemployment rate in the US, which I don't know what it is off the top of my head, 3 to 5% or something. But there's a huge gap here in economic trends of recent graduates in which entry-level positions are kind of being erased. And a lot of that, people are attributing that to an AI gap. And when I say an AI gap, I don't mean that these tools are doing the jobs well or at all, but there's a perceived that they can do, that the tools can handle what roles would be of entry-level positions. And so there's a devaluing in first what it means to do kind of economic work on, especially on the entry level. But then there's also what that does is that cuts out any kind of pathway to promotion and seniority in a lot of these positions, right? So if we have any kind of transition, it's because we're going to have kind of a missing generation of entry-level artists, creatives, white-collar workers, people whose positions are quote-unquote exposed to these kinds of technologies.
I think along the way, there's also, anytime someone says, oh, we can automate your job, with these technologies, what they're saying is, we don't care about the thinking that goes into the things that you write. We just think that the writing is it. The words on the page is it. And so that is one huge devaluing of what it is to be human at work. And then on the flip side, when these things are being put into social services, and oh, sorry, we don't have enough collective resources to make sure that everyone has access to healthcare, so we're going to give you an automated diagnostic assistant, say. That is a huge devaluing of what it is to be the person needing the service in that moment. You don't deserve more than just, basically, what's the word, a glorified version of a magic 8-ball answering your medical questions.
Okay, so as promised, into the group over here, can we start with Janet?
Thank you. So a thing I have found perplexing for years in this valley is how many so-called futurists talk about inevitability. And we hear quite a lot, including on this campus, about the inevitability of AI. In the same breath that I think some of the people trying to sell us AI and everything view certain other things that I would take as inevitable, like the law of thermodynamics, as perhaps negotiable. Is there sort of a pattern that in looking at this hype you could, or more you could say about the shell game going around what's inevitable and what's not here?
Yeah.
So I have a short answer that I like to that sort of question, which is that these claims of inevitability are actually a bid to take away our agency to refuse. And if we buy it, if we say, well, it's here to stay, we have to learn how to live with it, we have ceded that ground that we don't need to cede. And that's, I think, how it should be recognized. It also fits into this idea of science is a straight line thing. We can look where we are in the present, look back to the past, and like trace this was developed in that, and then that. And then in these science fiction, fan fiction documents, they basically imagine that we're going to the future that we know from Hollywood science fiction, and it's just a straight line, and we're going down that path. And the only question is, how fast do we get to go? And anyone who's done any scholarship knows that that's not how science works. But somehow it seems to need saying over and over again.
Yeah. I mean, and the inevitability narrative, I think, it's one that's it's not unique to Silicon Valley, but it's one that is a very strong one, in that we're having this kind of idea, if you get in the way of progress, you're a Luddite. And let's not forget that the Luddites, we're not uniformly against technology, but technologies that were going to devalue the work of artisan weaving and kind of networks of solidarity and kinship networks of production, right? And so then there were other technologies like assessing whether there was the kind of weave count or the thread count in particular fabrics that were being made. So it's a very kind of, I want to really emphasize that second part of the title, the create the future we want, because there are all alternative futures, and I think a lot of that has to do with imagining what those could be. And trying to do that outside of the rather narrow imagination of what happens around here.
And we're going to go to the ones online, and our RCC team member has identified a really interesting one, and then we'll take one more question here before we move to the raffle in person.
All right, so we have a question from Zoe Mubiru, who is asking if you guys have ever chatted with an AI bot, and how realistic it seems. What are your opinions on AI's ability to manipulate people, and how can this have effects for people's mental health?
There's a lot in that question. Thank you for that. The first part of the answer is no, I don't use these things. I do my very best not to read synthetic text. If I don't want to read something that nobody wrote. And people send it to me all the time. Look at this conversation I had with Copilot. It's like, I don't want to read it. But there are some deliberate design decisions in the way these interfaces have been created that make them particularly appealing, and I'm sure they're there to maximize engagement. Right? So there's absolutely no reason that something like a large language model should be using I, me pronouns, because there's no I in there, but it's set up to do that. And there's lots of people who are wrapping these things up in psychotherapy language and saying, here, you're feeling lonely, feeling sad, feeling down, you can talk to this thing. And there's a reason that psychotherapy is, first of all, a highly skilled profession, and secondly, a highly regulated profession. Because people who are vulnerable deserve someone who is skilled and actually connecting with them. And so, yes, I find that very worrisome.
Yeah, I've used them to a minimal degree, and usually by accident most of the time. But there's a lot of good reporting on people that are either auditing these, especially for things like psychotherapy. And I think the notion of manipulation is, again, this act of anthropomorphizing, of saying that you're imputing a motive and a desire to hide the truth. But more of what's happening is this maximization of engagement, right? You have the kind of, these are design choices, and there's a great blog post by Jeff Lockhart, who's a sociologist, and he's got a blog post on the sociology blog Scatterplot, where he talks about this kind of notion of the design interface and the use of particular phrases like I and a response of you and whatnot. And so, those are being made by people. It's not like there's a desire there to please the individual. It's those things that are intended to hook people that people respond to, right? But you get people that get taken in, like Kevin Roos, who thinks that a chatbot named Sydney was trying to steal him away from his wife, and has gone whole hog and continuing to report like that.
Okay, we have time for one more in-person question. I just want to remind everybody we're going to do an author signing, and even if you don't want your book signed or something, or your t-shirt, you can still line up over here and talk to the authors briefly as we go through. So we invite you to also get some Nirvana Soul and hang out. But don't leave yet. We've got one more question. We have a wrap-up, and then we also have a raffle. So one last question.
Thank you so much. I'm a longtime fan of your work. I'm a professor of education, and I'm very concerned about the coming generation and the effects on them. One of the sobering patterns that I've seen in the ed tech programs in education is that not only is there a data heist of the content data of the students of what they're writing, but there's also a behavioral data heist, where the way that they're interacting with the platforms is also being connected to their identities and these kind of future predictive sort of analytics of who they may be or their opportunities. Do you have any ideas about, if you've seen this in the AI platforms as well, and then just any ideas about prevention of longitudinal data harms given this challenging regulatory environment that is saying, let's do away with guardrails and let it all out.
Wow.
Thank you. It's a very challenging question, I know, but I'm like, thank you.
That's a great question. We did an episode of our podcast with one of my colleagues at DARE, Adrienne Williams, and she's been very concerned about this kind of theft of student data in the way that this is a wildly unregulated market, especially when there's and they encourage, they're really encouraging ed tech and charter schools, and typically these schools are in poorer, blacker, and browner communities, whereas you go to a school that's wealthy and white, and they're using pen and paper, they're getting away from the ed tech. So she's been very worried about that. And you're absolutely right. It's not just the content, it's not just the responses to the prompts, but they're connecting it to different behavioral data. I mean, you could think about this, and there's already discussions in ChatGPT and OpenAI about finding other paths to monetization, because there's not a path to monetization purely in selling the site licenses, but you need to be how everybody has made money on the internet for the past 20 years and 25 years, and that's ads and ad brokerage and everything Shoshana Zuboff talks about, data surveillance capitalism. How we fight back is very difficult, right? I mean, it's very hard to do this on an individual level, and there have been areas in which there have been, state level legislation in terms of protection against and arguments for data rights. So in California, the CCPA, although that's starting to be weakened, unfortunately, and they fired the last ED and all the other drama that's been happening in SAC. And so doing that is very difficult. I mean, I think a lot of it, thinking about education, I think we really need to educate a lot of people against what it means to think about your personal data and do data defense. And so there's a great workbook and a set of trainings that our data bodies put together. It's called the Digital Defense Playbook, and as a series of kind of workshops. And I think more of that needs to be done. It's such a hard thing, because doing that on individual community level is probably the only thing we got in lieu of not having a really aggressive enforcement regime.
Yeah. Very quickly to add to that, first of all, I love the phrase data heist. I'm stealing that one.
Stealing a heist seems appropriate.
And also your idea about longitudinal data harms,
Yeah.
I think, is a really pointed and wonderful way of saying that. And I think that to what Alex is saying about educating people, I think, while we don't have a lot of scope for good regulation, that we can work on norms, and norms of seeing this datafication as a kind of surveillance, and surveillance as basically an attack on vulnerable people. And the more, in School of Ed, the more you can bring the next generation of teachers to see it that way, the more people who'll be like, maybe we don't want to use this on our kids.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. I'm the Dean of the College of Humanities and Arts, and I wanted to thank everyone for being here, either online or in person on a Friday afternoon, where we have discussed intelligence, eugenics, labor, economic motivations, the sleight of hand of AI, and what is the human, and how do we find back our agency. That's a pretty amazing conversation for a Friday afternoon. So I want to thank everyone who made this possible. I am so appreciative to Emily Bender and Alex Hanna for joining us, and for Rhonda Holberton for conducting the discussion. Thank you so much for the Responsible Computing Club students. You guys are amazing. You are so great at asking the right questions, and you're going to lead us into a future that, because of you, I think ideally will be much better. Circle also was supporting this, as well as the Department of Humanities and the Masters of Archive and Records Administration, thanks to Dara Hoffman. And Kathy Harris, our MC, has been doing basically backbreaking work the last week trying to get this together. So thank you so much for her and for everyone. These are a number of different events that we in the College of Humanities and Arts have wanted to present to people, because we realize how important these questions of ethics and the values out of humanities and the arts are to these emerging technologies, especially AI, as you have heard. So thank you so much for your great questions, your time and energy, and your willingness to open yourself up to hear these important critiques of something that doesn't need to become inevitable, to return to a theme that we discussed before. Do we have a survey? Yes. So please, if you have a chance, we'd love to invite you to fill out a survey about this event. It helps us figure out how to put on more great events that support our campus community and our larger community here in San Jose and the South Bay. And now I'm going to hand things back over to Kathy to do a raffle for some free books, and then please stick around for the book signing after that. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Who doesn't love a little prize? So did everybody get a raffle ticket? Yes? Is there anybody who's like, what's a raffle? Okay. No, you don't get another one, Romy. The books are also on sale afterwards, credit cards and cash, and we do have, because the Spartan Bookstore helped us out with it, we do have a 5% discount here. I hope that's okay with y'all. Yeah, okay. Okay, so we've got the first, and the Responsible Computing Club students were here for the Dr. Lauren Klein Data Feminism one, so they're looking to make a matching set with autographs. So they're over here in the corner just chomping at the bit to get one of these. Okay, so we have the first one. I didn't look, I swear. 0656 163. Anybody? Anybody? You got it. Yay! Woo-hoo! These again are courtesy of Circle as well as the Department of Humanities. So we're really grateful to them. Wait, let me just mix that up a little bit more. I'm not looking. Okay. So the next one is 0656 178. Check your tickets. Oh, yay, Dana! 5 more left. There's 5 more. That's a lot. Okay, hang on. How often do you get a book and the authors are here to sign it? So you can open up to your favorite page and have them sign it right there. 0656 152. Oh, no? Oh, yay! One of our RCC team. I'm mixing them. Okay. I mixed it from the bottom up. Okay. So 0656 157. 157. You got to be here to win. Oh my God. 157. Going once, twice. Next one. Okay. 0656 177. 177, yes! Congratulations. Okay, next one. If you don't jump up and we go, woohoo, then I think our RCC team here will be like, oh, foiled. My eyesight? I don't know. Okay, 0656 153. Appropriate response. Okay, next one, 0656 168. Oh, there we go, yay! Okay, one more, last one. It's always fun to win something. Okay, last one. I actually don't think I can read this one. Okay, 0656 158. Oh, there we go. Yay, congratulations. Good job. So I invite everybody to stick around and hang out. You don't have to leave. Please eat as much Nirvana Soul as you would like, because we don't want to take it home with us. And then we're going to let our authors restation themselves at the table. And they have posters that they're signing as well. And we also have a way to use credit cards and cash if you'd like to buy a book now. Just give us a second to set up. Go grab more stuff for to eat. Right. Thanks, everybody. Oh.